Hello, everyone. Welcome to Dun & Bradstreet's webinar. Really excited to host this, and I welcome you all. This is Ravissh Hassan. I am the Regional Director of Marketing at Dun & Bradstreet, catering to the South Asia, Middle East, and Africa region. And today, we have a very interesting topic to discuss around ESG. Before we dive in, I would like to explain a little bit about what ESG stands for. So ESG stands for Environmental, Social, and Governance, which caters to mainly the environmental issues, social issues, and corporate governance. It's a UN-backed initiative, and it's getting a lot of popularity these days. So it's a very hot topic to discuss these days. There are certain markets in the South Asia and Middle East region that have already adopted ESG, while there's some markets that are still sluggish. But that's where we would like to help, and we would like to educate as to why ESG is so important for organizations. It basically caters to the human-centric and society-centric approaches for a sustainable future. So definitely it's something that's going to be of value to all of you. A little bit about Dun & Bradstreet. We are the world's largest commercial database company with over 560 million plus business records in our database. We've been a global leader and in business decisioning data and analytics for about 200 years. We support 90% of the Fortune 500 companies of all sizes. And here we are with yet another interesting webinar, Beyond the Giants, Why SMEs Need a Seat at the ESG Table. Let's move on and start. Before we begin, some housekeeping items. This webinar is being recorded and all lines are muted by the organizer. Please submit your queries, questions through the chat box window. You can submit your questions through the Q&A box during the webinar, or kindly raise your hand if you would like to speak. And we will unmute you. DNB shall share the webinar recording after the webinar. Please reach out to marketing@dnbsame.com in case if you would like to speak to the speaker. Now, to start off with, I would like to launch a poll in front of you to basically just understand what are the challenges that you're facing at your organization in order to implement ESG initiatives. And let's give it some time. So if you all can participate, and the options are data collection and analysis, stakeholder engagement, resource allocation, regulatory compliance, and measuring impact. Interesting. Okay, shall we end the poll? Let's see the results. So it looks like data collection and analysis has been the biggest challenge, followed by stakeholder engagement and resource allocation. All right, let's address this also. So I'll move on and introduce you to our speaker today, Nauman Lakhani, who is the Group Director, Enterprise Solutions at Dun & Bradstreet, South Asia, Middle East, and Africa. Nauman has over 20 years of experience. He has been mainly involved into business development, training, product development, product management, and risk management, including ESG and compliance. And Nauman is mainly looking after the ESG solutions in Dun & Bradstreet. And welcome, Nauman. A little bit of introduction that I wanted to give. And if you want to add to it, please.
Oh, not at all. Thank you so much for having me today in this webinar of the successful webinars that Dun & Bradstreet South Asia Middle East conducts. It's a great topic to speak of, Ravish, and it's a topic that is gaining momentum, and a lot of conversations have started around it. And the topic that we have on hand today is something of great importance, right? and how do we keep a focus on SMEs in this predominated regulatory environment for large businesses. So it's an interesting balance, and I'm looking forward to having this discussion, receiving some feedback, any questions and comments during the session as well. And let's dive into it.
Sure. So I'll hand over the screen sharing to you.
Sure. Let's see how I will be able to do it. So great. Thank you for the introduction once again, Ravish, and welcome everyone to the call. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, depending on where you're joining from. We as Dun & Bradstreet South Asia, Middle East have been focusing on ESG for quite a while now. And we've had some discussions with various of our clients across the regions in South Asia, Middle East, and Africa. And we'll continue having those conversations as well. But we felt this would be a good topic to talk of and cover. So before we dive into it, and since Ravish has already given you a key introduction about ESG, just as an intro note before we dive in is that environmental, social, and governance standards, as we all know, and we've been following the news, the standards are increasing and becoming a cornerstone for the responsible business practices. So while large corporates and multinationals who we'll be aware of in our local domestic ecosystems have been under significant scrutiny to implement ESG initiatives, the small and medium enterprises often feel overlooked, is what we've noticed. However, we also all have to agree in our own respective regions that SMEs play a vital role in the global economy, right? And can significantly impact the sustainability outcomes we're all achieving for. And that's what we want to focus on here. And that's the kind of story and the narration we're trying to develop during this conversation that we'll have. So on the slide that you see in front of you on the screen today is that if you see the population density, and I've just picked up the big bubble that you see right in the center, is China, India, Pakistan, Bangladesh, 4 big economies in Asia. And right next to it is Africa with another 26% of the population. So cumulatively, these 4 countries and the African continent combined represent about 66% of the entire world's population. But if you look at the bottom layer, the further contribution factors there is that these the size of this population, the globe represents about 60% of the workforce just between China, India, and Bangladesh. If you include Africa, this number even goes higher. And the global GDP contribution by these 4 countries, which represent 40% of the population, is about 22%. And about 38% of the all global registered SMEs are in this 40%, the big bubble that you see, right? And if we go on to the next slide, we'll see further that. So if you could just click one more time, Ravish. So we have to see that, for example, in Ravish, yeah, thank you. So even if you see that for India, as an example, the largest country by population in the world, the 35% of the LDM GDP is contributed by SMEs, with a significant portion potentially going unrecorded due to the informal types of business, right? And 80% of the workforce in China, Pakistan, Bangladesh is employed by SMEs. But what I'm saying in terms of the kind of the messaging that we're trying to give here is that in these countries, the SMEs are largely ignored during ESG policy considerations, is what we feel. Because let's look at some news items that we can see in the front, where we're talking about India's chemical blast disaster, or we're talking about H&M, right? That they make, you're talking about the pandemic lockdowns have pushed people in poverty, or the sweatshops in China, or the Bangladeshi female entrepreneurs struggling because of lack of financing opportunities which are available. So, and if we go to the next slide, and we look at some examples from Africa, if you just click it one more time. And we now can see within Africa itself that 50% of the African GDP is contributed by MSMEs, right? So micro, small, and medium enterprises, with significant portion coming from unrecorded because of informal business practices across Africa as well. And again, we see some examples of some news items that we see here, that it's urban pollution being fought is an issue, or Kenya's global gender index ranking has been declining, and workers are being unpaid, or again, sweatshop issues which are there in Africa as well. So we have to see and look at the ESG policies which are being developed worldwide. How do we look beyond does the large corporates and listed organizations, and how do we get the SMEs into the picture? And because we've just seen, Ravish, that the amount of SMEs that are there, both the sheer quantity of registered SMEs or the contribution that they have in the GDP or the workforce or the population itself, it's large by any means, right? And if you put all of those things into context, the question is are SMEs being taken into account? Are their views being taken into account while drafting the global ESG regulatory framework? Right. And if you just go to the next one, I just want to put some context into numbers because we'll again talk about Africa, which, if you just click it one more time, Ravish. And so another time, please. And maybe another. Yeah. So if you see the future is young, even from an African perspective, we can see that by, let's say, McKinsey standards, and they've done a research, which states that by the next year, Africa as an entire continent is going to have the largest consumer spending for goods and services in the world, which is a huge number. The African GDP is expected to reach about 30 trillion by 2050. Right, and about 1 trillion of which will come from like internet offerings and sizable growth from agriculture that is expected. The new workforce, which is going to enter Africa in the next 10 years, are expected to be more than the rest of the world combined. So, given these fundamental facts and the sheer volume and the sizes that we're talking about, it is where I'll connect to the next slide, Ravish, if you may. And that is around the regulatory framework around ESG, right? So as we can see on the slide itself, this is a handful or just a handpicked few examples of regulatory frameworks around the world of ESG. And the question again on the top, you'll see on the green is, are SMEs being taken into account? So in fact, quite a bit of ESG related regulations has emerged in the last 10 years as importance of protecting natural resources, data security, human rights have risen. Europe, for example, in Europe has several existing regulations regarding how to classify green investments, as an example. While most Asian stock exchanges are requiring disclosure of ESG metrics for businesses which are listed, and allow, and as an example, in the US, they've begun issuing guidelines of how future climate-related disclosures may be required. And if you take some examples of these newer regulations or the ones which have come in the last decade, in the US, as an example, the SEC, the Securities and Exchange Commission, about 2 years ago, issued a proposal of how companies will start picking up data for Scope 1, Scope 2 greenhouse gas emissions, and potentially for Scope 3 as well, including supplier emissions. Or the ROHS directive, which directs the companies to use 10 substances like, which restricts the usage of substances like lead or cadmium or mercury of the likes. You also have the EUV directive, which came about 20 years ago, and which laid down the measures to protect the environment by preventing or reducing the adverse impacts of generative and management of waste from electrical and electronic equipment, right? And even though these regulations came about 20 years ago, and some very recently as well, the challenges still remain. And the question once again is that have SMEs been taken into account while these regulatory frameworks have been developed? And will the actual adoption really happen? If ESGs are largely ignored, the SMEs are largely ignored. So that's the kind of message that we try to put in over here. And if you go on to the next slide, we'll see that, yeah. So if we put these numbers further into context, so SMEs, Ravish, do you mind going one step back? One more step back. Yeah. So SMEs contribution globally, we're talking about 40% of the global GDP being contributed by SMEs, and 50% roughly of the jobs being contributed by SMEs, right? Globally, this is not specific to any region. So what are the ESG implications? And if we try and research around this and we try and dig down deeper into this, we see the red bubbles which are there. If you don't mind going to the next, just pressing it one more time. And we'll see that in terms of the contributions on the ESG front, 63% of the global greenhouse gas emissions in Europe, are by SMEs. 40% of the solid waste is being produced by SMEs. 7 billion tons of carbon emission is coming from SMEs. And 70% of the industrial wastage is happening by SMEs. And if you go to the next slide, an even important one, more from a social and governance perspective, if you look at, you might go to the next slide, Ravish.
Yeah, but just before you dive into the slide, so I was just wondering how, if you could just answer, like, how are ESG regulations different for SMEs versus for large organizations?
So large organizations who are in most cases listed, so ESG as a concept, as knowledge across the world is still picking up, right? So there are consultants and experts out there who can help and facilitate along with the regulators in various markets, right? So the fact is that large organizations, for them to adopt and to understand ESG practices becomes a little easy. And also it is mandated by the regulators, such as we saw and we talked about, like the stock exchanges in various markets, and enforce ESG adoptions, or corporate governance guidelines would ensure that you take out sustainability reporting guidelines.
Right.
Or companies, which are large companies, FMCGs and others, would be monitoring United Nations Sustainable Development Goals on their website, and what are the progresses around those, or CSR activities in terms of social governance. So for these large organizations, I think it's very easily spelled out on what they need to do, and they may have the resources to be able to adopt such key areas as well. But when you look at SMEs, in most of our markets within, let's say, South Asia, Middle East, and Africa, the regulations are focusing on mostly listed organizations, right? And we're talking about SMEs. These are either informal or within the formal registered businesses in these markets. They need to spend all the resources to stay afloat and conduct good business, right? And let's go back to that slide where we saw the world picture and we saw the regulatory framework, right? And let's, for the audience's benefit once again, that if you see that world map of the regulatory framework that was there a couple of slides back. Yeah, this one, thank you. So if you look at, and let's read these out loud, right? What are we talking about? We're talking about Australian Modern Slavery Act, or the UK Modern Slavery Act, which came in 2015, or about 7 or 8 years ago, the US Trade Facilitation and Trade Enforcement Act came in. In California, Transparency in Supply Chains Act that came in, or the EU Directive in 2015 that came in. If you look at all of this, and when I spoke about the Securities and Exchange Commission's rules that have happened in the last, in terms of greenhouse gas emissions, these are all focused on large businesses, right? So that is where we feel that there seems to be that that gap that's there. What regulation should an SME follow? So not every business in every country, which is just registered, let's say, as a startup or a proprietorship or a small private company with 1 or 2 people of significant control, or partners are there, would they be required to do these ESG adoptions and disclosures? At the moment, it's not as enforced, right? It's only enforced in large organizations. Right. And there's a question also there in the chat as well. Maybe we can take that along as we go.
Sure.
At this time. So the question from Mr. Daniel, if I'm reading. Yeah. Daniel Zafar is that, what role do governments and large organizations play in supporting SMEs? This is a brilliant question. Thank you so much, Daniel, for asking that question. And the fact is that, and we'll talk about this as we go along into this webinar, is that I think that in our view, the support by large organizations, multinationals, large local corporates, government, semi-government entities operating in various countries, they are the ones who will need to guide, support, handhold, and take the SMEs who are connected to them as vendors, as suppliers, as business partners or clients. They need to facilitate these smaller businesses and guide them along to that journey, for them to have a goal in mind on where these smaller businesses need to be at in terms of ESG compliance or ESG adoption or better ESG sustainable practices, right? Because the world is evolving towards, as an example, we sit in client meetings where the client is looking for sustainable businesses as their future suppliers of the company. So how does an SME start contributing and know what to start contributing and how to start documenting ESG data as well, right? So there are so many factors of ESG, each within environmental, social, and governance. There's so many factors that are there that the role that the governments and the large companies need to do is that within their own supply chain network or their vendor network, they need to start create programs to educate these SMEs, handhold them, and bring in and assess where they are right now, so that they understand what the gaps are and what and where do need they, and then set a plan of where do they need to get to and what's the vision to get to in 3 to 5 years by adopting new and better sustainable practices in business, be it better waste management or energy management, as the case may be. Yeah, so I don't think we have any other
If there are any
question.
other questions, please
Yeah.
write it down into the Q&A box or the chat
So this
box.
came in the chat board. Yeah, this came in the chat window. Either whatever is comfortable for the people joining in the call. But yeah, maybe we can continue our conversations as the questions come in.
Yeah, sure.
Thank you, Daniel, once again for that question, and I hope we were able to answer that question. So we were here on this slide, and we were talking about how the contributions of SMEs are in terms of the ESG factors, right? So we talked about in the previous slide the red bubbles, if you remember. We spoke about the wastage and the water wastage and all of that, and it's a huge contribution just within Europe as an example, right? But if you look at a very, very important topic, and the kind of wordings that we've used here is that the overlooked leaders in an already overlooked segment, right? The gender pay gap and gender gap in SMEs. So we can see that less than 1/3 of the small business owners are women. Let's say the second thing that we see here is that within the startup funding, which is going on, only 2.8% of the venture capital dollars actually end up going to women entrepreneurs. We're talking about from a governance perspective, only 11% of women are on boards. And in terms of the credit, access to capital, access to lending, there's a huge gap that is there. That 70% of the women-owned SMEs in emerging markets are underserved or underserved by the financial institutions, and which is showing a picture that these are all important key factors within the ESG framework, and we can't just focus on greenhouse gas emissions and waste management, but women representation from a governance perspective or access to finance for women entrepreneurs around the world. These are also important factors within ESG.
Right.
Yeah. So, this is what we were leading towards, and that's the kind of question that we want to leave the audience with at the end of the day, right? So, what should we do after hearing all of this in terms of what's happening around the world from a regulatory standpoint, in terms of the gaps that we've seen or the contribution of SMEs that we've seen in terms of jobs and the GDP contributions and others. So should we focus on large corporates that are subject to regulatory compliance and sustainability reporting guidelines, or should we broaden the ESG focus to include the millions and millions of SMEs that are major contributors in the business ecosystem around the globe? The question is, what will make the needle move for meaningful ESG impact? Right?
Exactly. And I would also want the audience to maybe
is it just a handful of large corporates in every country, or is
add on to this?
Yeah, of course. And we would love to hear your opinions within the people who joined in to understand from you what you feel could be the key element around it.
If anyone has any opinion, comments, again, please use the chat window or the Q&A box. Okay, let's move on.
There are some questions that are there in the Q&A. Okay, so we have a question from Mr. Atif. who has asked that what do you think are the reasons why SMEs have not been considered at the ESG table? Is circular manufacturing even possible without having SMEs onboarded? So, Mr. Arthur, this is where we're coming at, right? So, to answer the second part of your question first is that can we have an entire 360 of efficient greenhouse gas emission recording and or better social impact or governance being done without ensuring the SMEs are not adopting efficient ESG practices? Probably not, right? So there needs to be a trickle-down effect of not just large organizations or multinationals adopting very good ESG practices and monitoring them as well, but rather also having that trickle-down effect on the entire supply chain and the vendor base, which is there in every country as well, to ensure that there are practices being followed and there are goals in place. There are improvements being done by these SMEs, and there are goals being set for these SMEs to be able to reach to that destination, which in turn would generally support those large local corporates, these exporters, importers, and multinationals alike in every country. So the first part of the question is, what do you think are the reasons why SMEs have not been considered? I think, and this could have various answers and various ways of looking at it, but one could be that in general, when regulatory policy is made or regulatory frameworks are developed, this is done based on in discussion with larger organizations and regulators in the country. And the SMEs are dispersed across various the areas of the country and getting opinions from everyone. And then these SMEs are within trading, within services, within manufacturing, right? And then there are so many sub-businesses all between them as well. How does a government or a regulatory body get such a wide, this is a huge majority of SMEs which are there, get their opinion in? So I think
there are some questions coming in.
Absolutely. So I think the SME authorities in the countries or the regulators, SME regulators in every country, I think they could play that role. There could be additional bodies that could be created, sub bodies that could be created within large countries, and where SME representation needs to be there and their voice needs to be heard. And when ESG regulatory framework is being developed, just not looking at how large organizations or multinationals are going to be adopting, but see how smaller businesses, informal businesses are going to be able to adopt those key policies as well. Or maybe have two separate implementation ideas around large businesses versus small businesses as well, right? Having different benchmarks and matrices to be able to monitor and manage and implement ESG practices for SMEs around the world.
Okay, so I'll take one more question. So there's a question by Zishan ul Haq. How can we take initial steps to govern ESG in our leather industry? Specific to leather.
So I think from a leather perspective, one of the key things, if I understand correctly, and I'm no expert of that market, but I think the kind of chemicals that are utilized or the kind of amount of water that is used and the drainage of excess chemicals that gets gone down into the wastage sewerage lines, or the health conditions of the workers which are there on the factory floor because of the fumes that they need to consume, and the kind of animals which are utilized or the kind of raw materials which are utilized to get to that final output of leather. The colorants that are utilized as well, is it natural organic colors or is it again synthetic colors as well? So based on all of this, I think businesses in the leather industry, again, in which part of the leather industry, because it could be sourcing or manufacturing or distribution or chemicals or many others, or the tanneries. So all of this that is happening here, I think every business within the value chain of the leather industry needs to ensure that whatever we're putting in as inputs, are they ethically sourced? Are the storages being happening correctly? Are the chemicals that we're using for any particular process for the manufacturing, is that correct? Are the health conditions of the workers on the factory floor being taken into consideration? Are they wearing the mask? Are the fumes not getting into the humans? Is there enough ventilation that's there? Is the water wastage that's happening and the chemical output that comes out in the process of leather manufacturing, is that going okay? Is the government taking into account? Is the sewage line big enough for it, for the area of the industry to consume that wastage of water? So I think these are the kind of steps the leather industry can start taking and putting ideas on the table for the regulators as well. And thank you.
Exactly. So, Nauman, do you want to take more questions right now, or shall we take it later?
So we can go ahead and I think probably take the questions that are there at this stage, because after this we'll be diving into what DNB is doing around this as well. So let's ask questions.
Okay, so Irfan has a question. How should an SME begin its journey towards ESG compliance? Is it feasible for an SME to address all key aspects of ESG simultaneously?
So I think it's a very good question, Irfan. Thank you for that. So SMEs cannot address all key aspects of ESG sustainability or adoption. And that's what we spoke of a little while ago, that I think there has to be a journey, right? So we have to set goals for SMEs to get to. The first step of the entire thing is to first assess SMEs all around the world, and this is where Dun & Bradstreet comes in as well, is to assess based on global benchmarks, what is the standing of the SMEs for the ESG standards, and understand what are the gaps today. Once that assessment is done and those gaps are identified, that is when SMEs can then plan the final destination based on the gaps to be addressed. Do they have the capabilities to address it on their own? Would they need government intervention? Would they need any other association support or regulatory support to get there? Right. So first identifying the gaps, getting themselves assessed, identifying gaps, and then making plans to for final adoption, right? So it could be a 1-year plan, a 2-year plan, or 3-year plan to address the open agenda items or the open areas of concern to be able to address them step by step. So I think that's the way to be able to do this. And how do they start? I think it has to start with, first of all, getting to themselves assessed by a third party who does ESG assessments. This could be a team of Dun & Bradstreet as an example, or other service providers, getting that first initial assessment done and then making a plan to go forward.
Okay. The next one is Tessina. She has asked about, I think that building awareness among SMEs is the first and foremost thing that must be done. A big portion of large corporations following ESG is that it sets up reputation for them in the industry. Having little to no recognition for their work, SMEs have little motivation to actually invest their efforts and limited resources that will bring sustainability in the industry. I think it's more of a comment, but generally I agree. I think that, of course, awareness needs to be created, and this is why webinars such as this, where we're touching base with dozens and dozens of people across various regions, it's getting the message out there. It is to invite SMEs to be able to come on the table, start having discussions, start creating awareness. And this could be done by government programs, or like I mentioned right towards the beginning, that it has to maybe start with large local corporates, with the multinationals in every country, and maybe they need to take the charge of and the initiative to be able to start that training process and education awareness sessions for the SMEs which are connected to them. And then it could have a ripple effect, and others could get trained as well, right? So yeah, I think I concur with those comments which have been mentioned. Right. Another question that came in is, how can a food production SME start on implementing or even establishing an ESG framework?
Again, I am no expert in terms of regulatory frameworks, either on food production, but again, I think Nazri, I think the start is, first of all, assessing based on where you're located as an organization, going to your regulator or on their websites and finding out what are the ESG guidelines and regulatory enforcement which are required in your country. Number one, as a guiding principle. Then there may be some sub guidelines or regulatory frameworks for various industries, manufacturing, services, trading, depending what some governments have those separately as well. First of all, starting there and doing the research and homework on that front. Once that is done, then what we can look at is that human grade and animal grade food production is so it's ethical, so it starts from ethical sourcing of the raw material that is being produced, and then at the end of the day, labeling it and going through the entire process around it. So it's where you're sourcing it from. Are the people that you're sourcing those raw materials from, are they is there no child labor happening there? Are the working conditions nice? So it starts from where the origination of the raw material is coming from, and that's a huge thing in the global food arena, right? And is mentioning where the authentic source is coming from, and then who are the people involved in the manufacturing process, which material is going to be utilized to pack the final food product. Is it going to be like some kind of a metal? Is it metal box? Is it going to be sustainable products or recycled boxes that are going to be utilized to be able to push and put this data in this final food products in, right? So that is also some key points of consideration. But I would start with going to the regulator first and to the website and finding out what the regulations are in your country around it.
Okay, we'll take some more questions here. What is being done to regulate the illegal mining practices of covert organizations that destroy SME supply chains and environment? This is from Anna.
So and I think something that I will not be able to answer, and we may maybe come back to you around it. And since you've registered for the webinar, we will have your email address, and we can come back to you offline. Illegal mining practices, of course, do not fall within the ethical boundaries of the ESG practices, and I'm sure and I'm confident that business governments all around the world and law enforcement agencies are definitely working towards ensuring that this is not there. But again, this is out of my ambit. I would like to take this offline, do a little more research, talk to the subject matter experts, and come back to you if we can gather some answers around this topic.
Okay, Shadman from Bangladesh. SMEs or startups usually are very focused on short-time survival income rather than long-term environment impact. Are there any short-term benefits for SMEs on getting ESG set up as a priority?
I think so, yes. And thank you, Sharman. That's a great question. Maybe we would have touched upon it a little later, but this is a great question. So, and I spoke about this a little earlier in my conversation as well, that smaller businesses, usually the main concentration is to stay afloat, right? It's not fancy business practices, fancy offices, and all of that. It is day-to-day business survival, ensuring that enough cash flow is coming in for them to survive, to pay their daily workers or monthly wages, and ensuring the cash flow is there. So I appreciate that even from a startup's perspective, a lot of cash is not there. That's why they are categorized as a startup. But then you also have to see that the kind of benefits that ESG adoption, or at least the inclination to adopt better ESG practices, has on SMEs or on startups, right? So the kind of confidence that, let's say a startup, let's say two startups, for example, both in the technology space, as an example, both in Bangladesh, one SME, and this IT startup, and let's say both are in application development, hypothetically. Both of them are trying to source business from, let's say, North America or Western Europe, and both are reaching out to those counterparties via email or phone calls or letters or any other correspondences. One of these companies, as a startup, has come to Dun & Bradstreet, Bangladesh, gotten their ESG journey started. They've gotten themselves assessed. They have a ESG badge, which is available on their website, which shows the consciousness towards ESG adoption. They may not be perfect on ESG, but they're assessed on ESG, and they're showing that they are, and have an ESG badge in their email. In their corporate profile, it shows that they have gotten themselves assessed on ESG by Dun & Bradstreet, as an example, versus the same kind of a company's comparable business, again in Bangladesh, right? But they've not done this. And both of them approach a company in, let's say, Germany, and they approach the same company for business, that we are providing this service. Would you like to use our services, or we would like to offload some of your work as an outsourced company, as an example? Which one do you think the German business is going to look at more, if both of them are startups and both of them are new? One with ESG assessment carried out, even though the output might be not great at the moment, or a company which has not shown ESG consciousness. So I think the investor appeal or the client appeal on adopting ESG practices is very high. And in this journey to start off on ESG, it's not supposed to be very expensive. You can start off very simple by understanding and learning what's happening in your environment, talking to the subject matter experts in your ecosystem. These could be consultants, these could be service providers such as us or regulators, and understanding what are required items in your own country for ESG. There are some global regulations that everybody should adopt, but then there are local regulations as well, which one could start with. So it takes small steps to get to the final destination. Yeah, but I think getting better customers, global outreach, sending a message to the world that you're ESG conscious, that you've started the ESG journey. I think it's a great appeal to both customers and investors alike from a startup's perspective.
Okay, so another question is, how can SMEs benefit from integrating ESG principles into their operations?
Oh, it's tremendous. If, first of all, that would mean if this is a very, this at stage 3 or 4, that means they've done their ESG assessments, they know what the gaps are, and now they've started to adopt ESG principles into the operation. This could mean sourcing, this could be manufacturing, this could be supply chain, this could be the cars that are being used or monitoring, water management, waste management, carbon emissions. There's so many elements that an SME would be adopting. So by breaking down what needs to be done, segment by segment, area by area, doing small steps and taking small steps to get to the final journey, I think everybody could, all SMEs could really benefit. But again, everybody needs to start somewhere, and nobody is going to be at a perfect position to start with. So we need to start the journey at one point and then take the conversation from there.
Okay. I'll take the next one really quickly. This is from Anas. While SMEs ESG rankings might not be as accurate as large corporates due to lack of resources, information, and contributions, would it be possible to develop and adopt specific ranking models for SMEs to consider non-quantitative parameters? As simple as planting trees, cleaning the beaches, paperless internal processes, for instance, and most importantly, how do we measure that outcome and link it to a global standard? Interesting.
So I think a fair question, Anas, and that goes back to a point that was mentioned in the chat as well, and something that we spoke of. Does it merit? And that's a question that we are putting to the audience as well. And we can, all lobby towards that, is that should there be 2 regulatory frameworks, one dedicated to large local corporates and multinationals and listed businesses, and the other for smaller businesses? Because the considerations for smaller businesses would be different. Like you mentioned, a smaller business not using as much paper as they used to, or not doing enough as much waste as they used to, or better water solutions or energy solutions which are being adopted by an SME. How does one monitor and maintain that, and then put that back into an ESG policy that they're documenting, and having that impact being gauged and monitored, so that the world, their investors, their clients, their vendors, their suppliers, they all get to see the contributions. Today, this will go unnoticed if one does it, right? So maybe there has to be some kind of a policy or regulatory framework that is developed that ensures that all this efforts being done by SMEs are being recorded in some capacity, and then they're recognized for these additional efforts that they do.
Okay. All right. So in the interest of time, let's move on to the next slide, Suman.
Absolutely. So if we go to the next slide, thank you so much, everyone, for participating and an active dialogue. Much appreciated the questions that you posted. Shows the kind of interest that is there and the willingness to adopt the ideas as well. So Ravissh, if I may just request you to go on to the next.
And I would suggest that you keep posting your questions and we shall be answering them on the go. So there's a poll right now. and you shall be able to see it on your screen. How do you see ESG as an opportunity for your business? And the options are improved reputation, enhanced risk management, increased investor interest, reduced costs, or improved employee morale. Let's give it some time. Okay, let's end the poll and share the results. So it looks like improved reputation, Nauman.
Yeah. So I think the results are something that is synonymous to what we just spoke about, right? So how do you see ESG as an opportunity for your business? I think reputation is probably, in my view, would have been the answer to start with, to show the world that you're conscious about it. And then, of course, as you go on the ESG journey, then you can enhance your risk management practices. We can, there's greater investor appeal that's there, like we spoke of from the Bangladeshi startup example. And eventually, once the ecosystem is developed, a reduction in cost is surely a possibility. And they would all, and there is generally a global consciousness around better sustainable practices, right? So at the end of the day, while within this poll, we have not gotten improved employee morale as any response, and there was no contribution there. But eventually, there are a lot of individuals who are more conscious towards getting organically sourced material, organically clothed clothing, and dealing with businesses which are more ethically or ESG standards are being adopted better. So that consciousness is building. So there could be an improved employee morale that could be there as well, of course.
Right. Let's move on.
Yeah.
How Dun & Bradstreet can help SMEs and corporates alike.
Yeah. So this is where, so if you go to the next slides, Ravish, so the idea is that we've heard the entire story that there is a huge regulatory point that's there. SMEs, there's a huge gap that's there as well. So how do you get to that final destination? So this is something that serves a repetition of that Ravish spoke of right towards the beginning in terms of our introduction. We're about almost 200 years old as an organization. The kind of experience that we bring in terms of data collection for corporates, which now also includes ESG, and we are the largest global private data collector for ESG all over the world, about close to about 100 million businesses that we've collected ESG data on. And the kind of data that information that we're able to see and assess businesses is remarkable. But overall, our pie has about almost 600 million businesses that we do cover worldwide. And we cover all UN recognized countries and territories. So this is just a very quick introduction to who we are as a recognition for people who might not know who we are as an organization. We go on to the next one. And just to let people know that the kind of services that we offer, so the Dun & Bradstreet Data Cloud and the Live Business Identity are the foundations on which we have crafted a range of SaaS solutions, right, to address a range of client use cases. Our solutions present the data cloud and intelligence in various ways. So our solutions, as an example, your finance departments can automate credit to cash processes and improve cash flows. Your marketing teams can more effectively target and capture new prospects. Your regulatory and technology teams can look at details better. Your compliance teams can work more efficiently. So these are all the kind of solutions that we offer as an organization. And if we deep dive into, if you go to the next slide, Ravish, please. Now, if we deep dive into the ESG, and so we've broken down our kind of services that we do in two areas that you can see on the screen. On the left-hand side, the three things that you see together are mostly for corporates, but SMEs, of course, larger SMEs can adopt these services, and there's a dedicated SME solution as well. So Dun & Bradstreet, we are conscious around it, and this is our way back of looking at SMEs because fundamentally we've worked with large organizations, but we are conscious that SMEs play a large part, and we don't want to be hypocrites because that's what we've spoken of. in this webinar itself. So, and we'll just talk about this product as well in the next couple of slides, ESG registered, which we feel is a very important one. So we start with risk analytics, supplier intelligence. So this is a software a SaaS platform that we launched last year. We've seen great response across our markets, especially in the GCC, and we're seeing growing interest coming from South Asia and Africa as well. So this is a platform which gives firmographic, operational, financial, and risk data on entities and businesses worldwide, on your supply chain, as an example. And what we built into this is the ESG intelligence framework, where large businesses or medium businesses can initiate ESG assessments of their counterparties to look at not just firmographic, operational, or risk data of a company, and club that into ESG data of the business as well. And so as a data set, and it's a very interesting one because we've seen a very great response from a lot of clients across the region. Right in the middle, it's called DNB Risk Essentials. This is a dedicated ESG platform where companies can come online. This is again a SaaS platform, and this is purely on ESG intelligence data. That means you can look for a business and see if they already have an ESG assessment carried out by Dun & Bradstreet. If not, then you can push out ESG questionnaires using this platform. And what I've just spoken of on the first two tabs, the API delivery is an option where large organizations which require larger data sets can go ahead and plug in our APIs into the ERPs and CRMs to pull in all of the ESG data directly into the platform. Similarly, the last portion that you see is a dedicated SME solution, and that is called ESG Registered. And it's a seal that I was talking about as an example, which I gave during the Bangladeshi startup example that I talked about. This is a seal, this is a mark that is available that businesses can commit to. They can come and get themselves assessed, and once assessed and a scoring is derived on that business, they will be issued ESG registered badge, which have a QR code, which will have an ESG profile, and businesses can add this into their website, their printed marketing collaterals, their email signatures, their business cards from a manufacturing facility. They can put it on their gunny bags or their big boxes or transportation boxes and delivery boxes to show to the world that they're ESG conscious, right? So these are the kind of solutions we have, and we'll talk about this a little further in the next few slides. Ravish, if you may. So we have to look at so how is Dun & Bradstreet helping you identify and understand ESG risk in the supply chain, right? With the world's most comprehensive business data, we have developed the ESG rankings based, and it's built around trusted sustainability frameworks, including the SASB and the GRI, covering about 81, 82 million businesses all around the world. This is both public and private businesses that we've already assessed using the SASB and the GRI framework. This data is gathered from billions of trusted sources, including financial filings that businesses are doing, sanctions and blacklist data that is there publicly, news media articles, regulatory agencies, NGO databases, certifications that businesses are doing. We have hundreds of trusted website sources where this data is coming from. So this ESG data is then updated on a monthly basis by the Dun & Bradstreet teams all around the world. And it helps us to then connect the dots and bring the ESG rankings and performance into the supply chain. Right. And so this is about it in terms of our overall thought process behind ESG solutions that we do have. And Ravish, if you can go to the next slide.
Before we going to the next slide, Nauman, what specific ESG metrics do you think SMEs should prioritize? And I'm sure that a lot of people may be thinking of this as well. So if you could shed some
I think
light
that's a fair point, Ravish. And from this view, there are various metrics to look at, and this ties into some of the questions that some other attendees have also spoken about and asked, and we've answered as well. So the metrics could be starting, if you break it down into environmental, social, and governance. Within environmental, the metrics could end up being, let's say, the carbon footprint, right? The measuring the greenhouse gas emissions and assessing the environmental impact that's happening because of it, or let's say energy consumption that businesses are doing within the environmental metrics, or the waste or the water management and consumption that is happening and the wastage that's happening, and starting to monitor that. So that could be the kind of matrix that you could start off with in environmental. In social, it could be, let's say we start with employee satisfaction as an example, right? So we can conduct surveys and have like a feedback mechanism with employees to ensure that we're covering and collecting this data. Is everybody happy? Let's say diversity and inclusion. Are all segments of society being hired and given fair and equal opportunity within our HR policies? It could be the ethics of the suppliers which are connected to us, the third party which are connected to us.
Right.
In governance, it could be something that we spoke of on our slide in terms of women representation on the board. So the board diversity, both in terms of religion, caste, creed, gender, having a wider pool there, or better ethical or risk management practices. So there could be various metrics that could be developed across the ESG frameworks. And if the people in the call on the webinar today go to the Dun & Bradstreet website or generally do a web search, I'm sure they'll be able to come up with various other key metrics as well, besides the ones that I've mentioned.
Sure. I would still encourage everyone to keep posting your questions. I know we're short in time, but we can
But
still
we're
manage to
almost
answer.
done and towards the end and the tail end of our conversation. And this is something I want to focus on, right? And this is the ESG registered badge I was speaking of. And on the right-hand side, you will see once a third party clicks a badge, imagining having this power in your email that you're sending out to a counterparty, or having this power on your website or on your business card. There's a QR code that anybody can scan and look at your ESG assessments on the Dun & Bradstreet website. It adds a lot of value. At the end of the day, what we're talking about is that, the message that you're giving, even though you might not have a very good ESG ranking today, at least you're giving the impression that you understand and you're benchmarking your ESG performance. It is going to differentiate you amongst the competition from one company to the other within the same industry. It's going to help you gain recognition in the global market, and it's take advantage of the ESG collateral that you can share about yourself and tell the world that you are ESG compliant or you're working towards that goal. So this is from an SME solution perspective. We highly encourage our customers to and there are a lot of our customers who are SMEs, and to look at this kind of a product, because it's going to really help them in the long run, and it's going to tell their the people who are going to do that kind of an SME, be it clients or business partners or potential clients, that this company is ESG conscious. Yeah, so let's go on to the next slide. And from a corporate perspective, right, as I mentioned during the conversation a little earlier, that the DNB ESG intelligence allows companies to incorporate ESG data and assess suppliers for ESG risk throughout the company's, let's say, procurement and supply chain and due diligence processes, screen for ESG risks while onboarding new suppliers, compare suppliers based on ESG rankings, like one company better than the other. You can actively monitor ESG throughout the value chain and almost near real time, because we're collecting data all the time and we're updating ESG rankings all the time. And so I think this is the kind of the story that I wanted to show to the audience, that in any phase, from risk management and starting from onboarding and various steps in between, companies can integrate the ESG framework. The medium and large organizations can integrate the ESG framework within their other policies in terms of risk or RFP awarding or onboarding or assessing third parties.
Right. We have a question. I'll take that really quickly. How much does an assessment and certification from DNB cost in terms of time and financial resources?
Sure. So it's not a very costly product. I will not be able to quote a number here on this call. That's something that so your name and your email will be here with us. So the sales teams after this call in your respective country will reach out to you and share those with you. But what I'll talk about is the process to be followed and the time to be taken. So this time to be taken is totally up to you. You will, if you as an organization, because we do send a very comprehensive questionnaire covering 31 key topics that I spoke about in the last, not the last slide, but the slide previous to that. And so if you as an organization have been able to collect all the data, which can typically take, from our experience, about from 1 week to 3 weeks. If you collect all the relevant data, your ESG policies, if you haven't one, you can draft them as needed and share all those details with us in an online questionnaire that we push across to our clients. Then the delivery could, depending on when you finish this questionnaire, so between 4 to 6 weeks, you could have yourself ESG assessed and get all the ESG certifications and badging from Dun & Bradstreet. And the cost, of course, so your question has been noted, and of course, the sales team member in your respective market will come to you regarding the financial requirements. But it's from just to let you know, it's not going to be very high.
Right. There's one more. How can SMEs compete with LMEs in terms of ESG ranking?
So I think that goes back into two frameworks that exist today. There's one regulatory framework which every business in every country needs to adopt, right? So there's no large scale manufacturing versus smaller, large company versus small company. There's no regulatory framework that's there today, right? So the fact is that every company's attributes are different in which part of the supply chain they are, which part of the economy they are part of, right? So there are various considerations that are there. So I think it's not a matter of looking at it from a competition that I'm better than you or you're better than me, but rather showing to the businesses that you're connected with or future could be connected with is that how are you you're showing ESG consciousness and transparency, right? And you're showing and you're looking and working towards better ESG ethical practices. So I think that's the kind of messaging that's going out rather than competing. So it's not a financial scoring, just like, you know, a large organization will have a better financial scoring or a risk scoring versus a smaller. So I think that kind of comparison I would encourage not to look at it that way, but rather look at it the way that everybody who's coming towards ESG disclosure, that they've taken a step in the right direction. Yeah. So in terms of, so this is what we were talking about, and this just sums it up that we are empowering organizations to identify ESG risk lurking in the supply chain. So this is now more focused towards larger, medium, and large organizations if they are on the call. And we do, of course, we have within a 360 degree from government, semi-government, large to small businesses. We cover everything from our services that we provide. And so we help these businesses understand deeper ESG impact on supply chains. Again, how can we do that if SMEs don't participate and provide us with their data? And, you know, we generate insights that help reach and strengthen organizations' current ESG goals and policies. You know, we can assess how to attain ESG risk data on private third parties and companies in high-risk jurisdictions. That's an advantage that DNB brings to the table, because we have offices in over 100 countries in the world. And you know, that really helps us to collect data in very tough jurisdictions when generally one would not travel and collect data on. And it's to identify and monitor arising issue because of non-compliance, because we're continuously updating data. And clients who are using our SaaS-based solutions are taking the benefit of this kind of continuous monitoring of information. So yeah, I think that Ravish, you know, covers the main areas of the conversation. I know we have about 5 minutes over time.
Yeah.
I think we probably have one last poll to conduct.
So the poll question is, what challenges do you face in collecting and analyzing ESG data? Data quality, data consistency, data accessibility, or data privacy? Let's see.
Another 10 seconds, we still see responses coming in.
Them coming.
The most amount of responses since we started. Thank you for that contribution, everyone.
Okay, let's share the results. Right, so data accessibility. Nauman, if that can be something.
I would have answered the same, I'll be honest. I think to be able to and connect this to the ability to collect that data, to how do we get to that data, right? So we spoke about example and something that there was a question, I think by Anas in the chat, that if there's an SME which is consuming less paper or now has put solar panels to consume less grid energy as an example using fossil fuels, how does that get recorded, right? So how do you access that data? How do you record that data? So I would have answered data accessibility as well, and majority of the people on the call have answered that as well. So I think this has been a great conversation around, and I think we just have one more slide to go to be able to wrap up this.
Right. So in the interest of time, I'll just quickly move to the next slide, which is our last slide. There's this white paper that we have just recently published on ESG on the Rise, a regional overview of South Asia, Middle East, and Africa. And if you would like to access that, there's a link in the chat box. And or otherwise, you can just visit our website, www.dnbsane.com, and it shall be available under the Knowledge Center. It's an interesting one. It will give you great insights about what's happening in the region and how we can adopt ESG practices, of course. With this, we would like to end the webinar. If you have any questions, any queries, if you would like to reach out to us, please write at marketing@dnbsane.com. You can also reach out to us on LinkedIn. It has been a great webinar. Thank you so much, Nauman. Thank you for giving such insightful presentation. And any ending remarks, anything from your end?
Thank you so much for having me, Ravish. This is great work in terms of these amazing knowledge webinar series that have been conducted. Great topics being thought of to being brought to the audience. And I'm really encouraged by the kind of questions and the comments that came in, so the participation that was there. It's always good to have interaction from the audience and see the real life examples and issues that people are facing from their own end, right? So, and as an example now, I can see some comments also coming in. Irfan saying my key takeaway on ESG is that it's not just about meeting regulatory requirement, but it's also actively contributing your country and humanity. Absolutely, Irfan, is being a model citizen and a model organization. We have to start from there and look inwards first and then look at others. You're absolutely right, and that will create a huge value. And so I really hope that this conversation has supported the audience. It will add value. It will encourage people to think in a particular direction. If they have any questions after this webinar, would love to answer them and meet anyone who would like to talk about this topic even further. And thank you once again for the opportunity to speak on this topic, Ravish.
Thank you so much. Thank you, everyone. And you shall receive the recording soon. And please do access the white paper on our website for further insights. Thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone. Take care. Have a good day.
Take care. Bye-bye.